It is time for us to add the final piece to this puzzle. So far we have discussed the 3 FLD lines that are displayed on each one of our charts. We have also discussed the sequence of interactions between price and those FLDs, and the way in which that sequence can lead us to expect support or resistance or an acceleration point when price interacts with the FLD. We've also discussed the targets that are generated as a result of price interacting with that FLD. The final piece of the puzzle is to consider the cycle analysis. We have been looking at a chart on the MT4 trading platform, and that is because the concept of displaying your cycle analysis using the diamond notation does not differ from one trading platform to the other. But let's take a look at how you can display your cycle analysis on the NinjaTrader platform, a much more elegant and better looking platform in my opinion. So let's display our cycle analysis here. We will of course open our properties for the sentient FLD indicator. And in our properties, we scroll down to this property over here, Analysis Display Style. You will see that up until now, I have chosen the display none. In other words, the analysis is not being displayed on our chart. So we will change that by clicking this drop-down arrow. And you can see that we have a few options for different ways of displaying our cycle analysis. We're going to start in this video by displaying our cycle analysis using what is called the diamond notation. So we choose the display diamonds method and then we click on the OK button. And there is the next piece of the puzzle. You can see our cycle analysis has been displayed by means of these stacks of diamonds at the foot of the chart, and also these symbols which are called circles and whiskers, which build up together what are called nests of lows. Now we will switch back to the MT4 platform for the rest of the explanation about how the diamond notation actually provides you with information about the cycle analysis that has been performed. The diamond notation was proposed by J.M. Hurst in his cycles course that he published in 1970. The way in which it works is that the trough of each cycle found in the analysis is marked by means of a diamond. Because of the principle of synchronicity, which we will be discussing when we get to delve into Hurst cycles analysis in a little more detail, because of that principle, the troughs of these cycles are synchronized where possible. And as a result, these diamonds form stacks at the foot of our chart. The taller the stack, the greater the magnitude of the cycle that is forming a trough at that point. And so this particularly tall stack of diamonds over here that occurred in October of 2023, and this is the S&P 500 that we're taking a look at here, that tall stack of diamonds tells us that a high magnitude cycle trough occurred at that time. Of course, our cycles are color-coded, and the diamond at the top of the stack is a yellow-colored diamond. The yellow-colored cycle is the 40-week cycle. And so we know that a 40-week cycle trough formed in October of 2023. The next tallest stack of diamonds that occurs after that is this really rather small stack of diamonds consisting of only 2 diamonds. The top diamond in that stack is the orange-colored cycle, which is of course our mid-cycle. Here it is over here. That is a 40-day cycle trough. And so the cycle analysis is telling us that a 40-week cycle trough occurred over here, and then a 40-day cycle trough occurred over here at the end of November. These small little single diamonds are, of course, our signal cycle. That is the 20-day cycle, which you can't really see up there anymore. It's at the top of our table. That is the 20-day cycle, and so we know that a 20-day cycle trough occurred over here in about the middle of November, and another 20-day cycle trough occurred over here, which was just after the middle of December. So what is happening next? Well, the diamond notation, as you can see, plots diamonds in the past where cycle troughs have been found. In the future, we are focusing on a different symbol, which is this collection of circles with lines to each side of them. We call these the circles and whiskers. The circle is the exact time that the next trough of the particular cycle is expected to form. These circles and whiskers are also stacked, as you can see, with the shortest cycle at the bottom and the longest cycle at the top. Because of the principle of synchronicity and the fact that these cycles are beating with wavelengths that have a harmonic ratio, which we will be discussing in a future video, but because of that, these circles tend to line up on top of each other. They don't line up perfectly because of the variation in the cycle wavelength. That's another principle that we'll be discussing later as well. But what tends to happen as we look into the future is that these circles line up one above each other in an approximate fashion. The whiskers are the lines that extend to each side of the circles, and those whiskers represent a reasonable range of time within which that cycle trough could be expected to form. Because the reasonable period of time in which a longer cycle trough could be expected to form is wider, or a greater range of time, than for a shorter cycle, the whiskers for the longer cycles tend to be wider, of course, than the whiskers for the shorter cycles. The result is that we get these triangles that seem to be standing on one of their points, consisting of circles in the center of the triangle and the whiskers reaching out to each side. These arrangements are called nests of lows, or at least they were called nest of lows by Hurst, and we continue to call them that. A nest of lows indicates that a trough of a cycle is expected to form. Those nests of lows are very important because they tell us what to expect in terms of the cycle action. In this case, we have a nest of lows with the longest cycle being the green cycle or the sequence cycle. You can see here the green cycle is the 80-day cycle. And so we have a nest of lows indicating that an 80-day cycle trough is expected to form at about this time in the market. If I enable my crosshairs, we can estimate that that 80-day cycle trough is expected to form on about the 6th or 7th of January, so fairly soon. Let's zoom in here for a moment and consider this in just a little more detail. As you can see, price has formed a peak over here. It has now crossed down below our signal cycle FLD. It has then achieved that target for the 20-day cycle. It has also crossed down below the mid-cycle FLD. You can see the downward pointing arrows indicating that we were expecting a downward cross. Note that those are still arrows. We're not seeing a cross symbol. In fact, I'm not displaying the past interactions. So let me do that so that we can speak about it. There we go. So you can see here the cross symbol for price crossing below the signal cycle, and that is labeled an F category interaction. What is the next interaction that we would expect from the signal cycle? You can see it over here. That would, of course, be a GH category interaction where price would be expected to come back up to the FLD and find resistance. Let me take a quick moment in this video as an aside to point out something interesting that is happening here with these signal cycle symbols. Note the downward pointing arrow over here on today's bar and another downward pointing arrow over here on tomorrow's bar, the next day's bar. But then you will notice that we have an upward pointing arrow for the signal cycle. Why is that? I would encourage you to maybe even pause the video and think about it for a moment. Why would the signal cycle change from providing resistance to providing an acceleration point for price? The reason why it does that is because we are expecting an 80-day cycle trough. Following an 80-day cycle trough, the interaction that occurs after that would of course be an A category interaction, which will be an acceleration point for the signal cycle. That is why we are seeing a change from resistance to acceleration for the signal cycle. Note that the GH symbols are still printed over here, and that is because those symbols are printed for the current bar. In other words, if price was to come back up to this FLD today on this bar, we would expect a GH category interaction, in other words, resistance at the level of the FLD. But as we move into the future, you can see that the FLD is expected to change from providing resistance to providing an acceleration point. Okay, so back to discussing our cycle analysis. price has crossed down below the signal cycle in an F category interaction, it is now still in the process of crossing below the mid-cycle FLD. Why do we not see an X symbol there yet? Because median price for these bars has not yet crossed below the FLD. It looks as if today we are indeed going to be crossing below that FLD, but of course I'm recording this video before the US markets even open, and so that price cannot be considered to have crossed that FLD yet. But certainly if it stays around about current levels or drops a little lower even, then it will certainly have completed that cross. That cross is a D category short interaction. Why is price moving down? Very simply because it is heading down into an 80-day cycle trough. Now, I've got another question for you. We saw a 40-week cycle trough forming over here in October. There is the yellow diamond for it, just a little bit hidden by price. We are not going to be trading our interactions with our sequence cycle on this chart, I should remind you. But what are we expecting in terms of this green sequence cycle FLD? Of course, you can see it displayed here. We're expecting a BC category interaction. What are our symbols telling us? They are arrows pointing upwards. In other words, this green cycle FLD is expected to provide support. Why would a green cycle or sequence cycle FLD provide support at this point? The answer is because this is the first 80-day cycle trough to form following a trough of at least, in this case, the 40-week cycle magnitude. And at that time, we would expect support to be provided by this 80-day cycle FLD. I hope that all the pieces of this puzzle are beginning to fit together for you. You can see how the targets and the FLDs work together, informed, of course, by the cycle analysis. Zooming out again, let me point out something else about the cycle analysis. Here we have the 80-day cycle trough, of course. Here we have the circle and whiskers for the next 20-day cycle trough. And here is a circle and whiskers for the next 40-day cycle trough. Why isn't there a circle and whiskers for the 20-day cycle trough beneath it? It's because of the shorthand method that we are using in the sentient FLD indicator. The cycle analysis performed by the sentient FLD indicator is not a full Hurst cycles analysis, which requires a tremendous amount of processing power and is unnecessarily complicated because of the fact that we also have the information derived from the FLD. There is a mutually beneficial loop, if you like, between the cycle analysis and the FLD. Because the sentient FLD indicator understands the sequence of interactions between price and the FLD, it is able to reverse engineer that sequence of interactions and apply it to the cycle analysis. This proves a very effective way of performing a Hurst cycles analysis. But it does not have quite such a thorough and full understanding of the cycle analysis as our other cycle analysis tools. And this is seen in the plotting of the future expected troughs. The sentient FLD indicator does not do the work necessary to calculate accurately exactly where cycle troughs several waves in advance are expected, because the truth is we do not need to know that. The sentient FLD focuses on the information we need to make effective trading decisions right now. It is not a tool designed to be looking far into the future to determine where the 40-day cycle trough is going to occur in a few months' time. We're not really interested. It is focused purely on providing the information we need now to be making sensible trading decisions. The same thing is true for the analysis in the past. If we zoom out, you can see that the analysis does not go very far into the past. Notice this, the analysis only goes back to this 40-week cycle trough over here in March of 2023. Notice also the slightly questionable placement of this 40-week cycle trough, which probably should be better placed over there. If you are a Hurst cycles analyst, you will know that you are constantly wanting to look further and further into the past, and you're going to be wanting to move this trough over there, but then you're going to be measuring this cycle here, and you're going to be saying, what cycle is that? Hang on a minute, we've got a short cycle, then we've got a long cycle. Put all of that consideration aside. The sentient FLD indicator is focused on providing you with the optimum analysis information that you need to perform your trading now. Do not worry about the position of these troughs in the distant past. They are not of any importance to you. If you are a Hurst Cycles analyst and you really want to delve into the details, then you will probably want to start working with our Sentient Trader software or the Hurst Cycles Analysis Suite for MT4. That kind of detailed analysis is not the purpose of the Sentient FLD indicator, which is focused upon providing you with the trading information that you need at your fingertips in the moment. As you step down through the shorter timeframes, you can see the analysis giving you further detail about what we can expect. Here we have a nest of lows, with the longest cycle in this nest of lows being the yellow cycle, which is of course still the 80-day cycle. This is a 4-hour chart. Here you can see the 20-day cycle. The sequence cycle on this chart has been phased below this price low over here. It is in fact ever so slightly displaced to the right. The reason for that is because cycle lows are not necessarily absolutely synchronized with price lows. It might be surprising to you, and of course usually we encounter price lows that occur at exactly the time that the cycle low occurs. But there are occasions, and you will see them on your charts, where those cycle lows are slightly displaced from the price lows. Here you can see we have a 20-day cycle target and also a 40-day cycle target from our daily chart. We were looking at the daily chart a moment ago. Again, we have a discrepancy between the 20-day cycle target on the 4-hour chart and on the daily chart, which we saw a moment ago had already been achieved, and there it is over there. I discussed that difference in a previous video, so if you haven't seen it, I would suggest you go back and make sure that you catch up on that detail. So what is this cycle analysis telling us? We've got the FLDs, we've got the targets. Do we really need to be bothered about the cycle analysis? Well, I would suggest that we do. Trading the FLD without keeping an eye on the cycle analysis would be a little bit like driving with one eye closed down a misty, twisty mountain pass. Although we can see everything through our one open eye, having both eyes open will give us that much more appreciation of the depth and what lies ahead of us, and that is certainly true with the cycle analysis. So we do need a cycle analysis on our charts. What is this cycle analysis telling us? Here we have a nest of lows for the 80-day cycle trough, which we saw on the daily chart as well. That is telling us that price is being drawn down into this 80-day cycle low. We have some targets lying below us as well. It is possible that price will reach down to these targets and form the 80-day cycle trough at those targets, or it might extend a little lower, or it might not even reach low enough to reach the targets. The important thing is that we are expecting an 80-day cycle trough. According to this analysis over here, we have a 10-day cycle trough that is actually lying in the past, and you can see it was expected over there. Quite possibly that is the 10-day cycle trough over there. But there is not enough detail on this 4-hour chart for us to determine that the 10-day cycle trough has formed. When we step down to the next shorter time frame, the hourly chart, you can see that we have a neat stack of diamonds below that price low that I pointed out a moment ago. The diamond at the top of the stack is the blue colored diamond, which is of course the 10-day cycle. And so you can see we're getting more and more detailed information from this cycle analysis as we step down to the shorter and shorter time frames. So the 10-day cycle trough has been found on the hourly chart. Price was expected to come down into a trough around about here, and quite possibly found that trough. That trough, as you can see from the table at the top of our chart, is a trough of the 2-day cycle. Stepping down to the 30-minute chart, you can see again the 10-day cycle trough over here. Note, of course, the change in colors because the cycles that are analyzed on the 30-minute chart are different. That yellow diamond represents the 10-day cycle trough. And here we have a rather straggly nest of lows for the green cycle, the sequence cycle, the 2-day cycle. And so we are looking at price coming down and forming a 2-day cycle trough. You can see that the circle on the circle and whiskers for the 2-day cycle nest of lows was actually just a couple of hours ago, indicating that it is possible that that 2-day cycle trough has now formed. This is a potential candidate for that 2-day cycle trough. Notice what our FLDs are telling us on the 30-minute chart. We're looking at the FLDs all providing acceleration points for price to rise out of this trough. Stepping down to the 15-minute chart, here we also have the circle for the 2-day cycle trough. Bear in mind that, of course, the colors of the cycles are different on each chart. It's an important thing to remember. We did that because it means that our signal cycles are always purple, our mid-cycles are always orange, and our sequence cycles are always green. They're colored that way to make trading on any chart easier to perform. That is why we have the table at the top of the chart, and so this blue colored cycle is of course still the 2-day cycle, which is expected to form a trough about now. Notice how the 12-hour cycle targets have been achieved. There we have them there, both from the 15-minute chart and the 30-minute chart. Both have 12-hour cycle targets roundabout here. And so we are looking at the 2-day cycle trough potentially forming about now. It might have just formed in the markets. And so that is how we display the cycle analysis information on our charts using the diamond notation. When we discuss trading with the sentient FLD indicator, we're going to be paying a lot more attention to that cycle analysis and discussing how we use the cycle analysis at the foot of your chart to actually inform your trading decisions. But in the next video, we're going to look at other ways of displaying this cycle analysis information on your charts.